everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for the next piece in the Right Fit content series. I'm really excited to be joined today by two awesome guests who are going to share all of their insights in how to create multi-platform content at scale. So I know it's one of the biggest challenges that most of us face in businesses now in trying to make engaging, insightful content for all of the channels that we have to feed. So thank you so much for joining us here today, guys. And I wanted to jump straight back into it. So as a brand, we have all of these channels. We've got Instagram, we've got LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, more channels than we've ever had before, which is really exciting and really powerful in building a brand, but also super overwhelming. As a brand, how should we decide what channels we use and what sort of content we can make?
So I'm a big believer, and I think, new channels come out all the time. Some are right for brands, some aren't super right for brands. And I'm a big believer that you have to look at the audience that you're targeting and what their online behavior habits are. So if they're spending a lot of time on Instagram, for example, that's one demographic. So really looking at the consumer base and where they're actually spending their time and attention. I think what brands are really after is catching attention. So following where consumer attention is going is absolutely critical. And also looking at the way that people use those platforms. So kind of thinking about, what they want to get out of their Instagram experience, what they want to get out of their TikTok experience, and what they want to get out of their Facebook experience will be so different. So looking at kind of, as a brand, where could you add value and where could you find your consumers so that you're getting your message out there to the right people.
Love that. And so to build on it a little bit, the way I look at it is like, first and foremost, building engaging content is hard. It's an art form.
Yeah.
It's not easy to be done. And there's actually a lot of thought process that goes into it. It isn't just a cut and paste styled solution. So when producing any form of content, regardless of platform, the way that I'll always look at it is step one is, what is your goal? Define what your goal is. And then once you understand your goal, you can then understand, first and foremost, what are the most appropriate channels to focus on, and then build from there. When we talk about channels and selecting the right channels, there is an endless supply of them, and every day a new one pops up. Prior to going on camera, we were laughing about TikTok, and it's true. There'll be another TikTok in the next 12 months, and they just continue to build. So as brands, we feel very overwhelmed. So something that's really important to think about is, one, what is your goal? But number two, where is my audience that's going to help me achieve my goal? Because at the end of the day, we need to have metrics for success. And so if you can understand what the goal is and then understand how to align your goal with the audience and the platform, you can essentially start to create a content strategy that will work.
So when you both talk about that, how do you go about then identifying, okay, now I know what my goal is, now I know who my audience is and where they're spending all of their time, now I need to make content. How do you do the last bit? Is it a case of creating unique content for every single channel? Or do you try and repurpose content? Or does that just alienate people? How should I go about it?
So I'll jump in on this one. So when creating content, a best place to start is, first and foremost, think about what kind of long format content can I build, and then how can I kind of cut that into multiple pieces of content. So a great example that I'll always reference to is if we were to create a long form piece of blog content or a vlog or even a podcast, for example, how many different snippets can I cut that into, and how many pieces of content can I create, and then figure out where you're going to distribute that content. Easiest way to look at it is this: if I create one piece of content for one platform, it only has a very short lifespan, and you've invested a lot of money into creating that single piece of content, which will never see the light of day again. So think about, how can I create content that I can first and foremost cut into multiple bits of content to then distribute and amplify across multiple platforms. The other thing, and I just want to touch on what you asked, was every platform think natively. I've seen so many brands time and time again create content for, let's say, blog, and then try and repurpose it on Facebook, and we may have a disconnect. You can repurpose content across multi-platforms, but every time you repurpose it natively for that platform, meaning that the look, the feel, the message, and the tone needs to be suited natively to that platform.
I completely agree. I think probably one of the things that we find really helpful to create really good social content is thinking about that kind of big overarching brand message. And, that ties back to the goal that you mentioned before. And thinking about what's the big brand message that could hit the goal. And from there, what are the different related streams of content? I think a lot of brands sometimes struggle and end up, doing cut down TVCs and things like that, which because they're not native to the platform, they won't actually get any cut through. So what we really like to do is kind of establish that big brand objective, and based off of the big brand objective, split out into different content pillars. So decide, hey, this content pillar is going to hit the goal of brand awareness. This content pillar is going to hit the goal of sales conversion. This one's going to engage and educate people. And what that does is it kind of creates different buckets within which you could create content, all that align to your bigger business goals. So I think while creating that big piece of content and then making sure it's got sustainability and is able to be posted across also all social channels natively, and also adding to that, really thinking about, what buckets are you creating content in, and how does each piece of content you create then align back to your bigger business objective?
That's really interesting. And what you touched on there about using the wrong type of content on particular channels. I think you see it all the time with brands using advertising images on social, which I just feel like really does not resonate with consumers at all. Do you see any other sort of common, let's call them brand fails in that space, where there's maybe either channels that they shouldn't be using and that just feel really wrong, or content that they shouldn't be using on particular channels that feel really wrong?
100%. You see it day in, day out.
Yeah.
Where it comes from is they don't have that well thought out content strategy. And it's, where we were just discussing is that what I love about, and I just want to pivot a little bit here, but I want to talk about TikTok as a channel, not in its full entirety, but just touch on it. The millennials and Gen Zs are now more aware of advertising than any other generation. They can spot it from a mile away. And so if your content isn't native to that platform, meaning that it does not disrupt their scrolling, it'll stand out. So the whole objective when creating content, especially if we're talking the social channels, is it needs to feel native within somebody's feed. So as they're scrolling through, it doesn't feel like an ad.
Yeah.
And that's a very simple place to start. Does this feel like an ad? The great thing about platforms like TikTok is Gen Zs and millennials spot this from a mile away. And I'm seeing time and time again on TikTok, brands are really failing to show up correctly on that platform because they're trying to take an advertising strategy to a content platform. And it's a completely different line of thinking. So yeah, I'd probably touch on that.
Yeah. I think also from kind of social content, one of the things that we see performs really poorly is creating content that, one, doesn't fit the social platform. So, doing things like on LinkedIn posting cocktail recipes, or on Facebook posting, the kinds of content that should be going on Instagram, for example. And then just a couple of like personal ones that I hate seeing is any kind of like stock imagery, or any kind of image where, you feel like, hey, any brand could post this. All you're doing is posting something that doesn't add value. And I think for me, the ethos really to content, and the question that everyone should ask before they post anything is, does this add value to the viewer? And every viewer and every brand will be different in how they consume value and how they deliver value. But if you can't answer the question of, does this add value, then you shouldn't be posting it.
God, I love that. Like, it's just content for content's sake.
Exactly.
Always, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe we all got in this habit of going, gosh, I've got all these feeds that I need to fill. Everyone's told me to beat the algorithm, I have to post twice a day, or I need to make sure I'm, using Instagram stories or posting on LinkedIn to build my brand. So, okay, so it's about pulling back and getting focused on adding value and reaching those goals, as opposed to just creating volume of content.
So just on that, but if you definitely it's quality over quantity, and everyone fell into the trap. I think we're sort of starting to see a curve happen, and we're no longer in that trap, and people are actually just genuinely creating the right content for the right platform. But going back to the first question, people say know your audience, and it's such a throwaway term. Who is my audience? Okay, we essentially we profile somebody and we give them very generic, psychographics, so to speak. Female of this age group, lives in this kind of area, earns this much. It's too broad. Really get to know your customer, and the more that you actually understanding your customer is understanding their motivations. What are their pain points? What are their needs? What are their wants? And when you can actually really understand that in its full entirety, then you can produce content that really does this add value, instead of just being like, because to us as brands, we think everything adds value because we're blinded by reality. We're in our own little bubble, and it's that thing of looking at it from 30,000 feet to really simply ask, Does this add value?
Yeah.
Will it talk to their motivation? Will it enlighten their day in some way? A principle or a framework I've worked on for years is educate, entertain, and inspire.
Right.
Ask that question quite simply. Does this piece of content educate? Does it entertain? Or does it inspire? The objective is to hit the trifecta that it should do all three, at a bare minimum 2. And by doing that, it will simply be able to answer that question, does this add value?
Do you have any little hacks for brands who are looking to try and understand their audience? Because as you say, a lot of the time, especially I think maybe when we're thinking about building custom audiences in Facebook and things like that, we're thinking, okay, they're female, they live in these particular areas, they're this age group. But I don't think we think a lot about what drives them, what motivates them, what inspires them, what excites them. Do either of you have any advice for brands on how they can actually get into that next level of granularity?
I mean, I'm a big fan of research. Like, I think there's so much you could learn through researching, whether it's doing, proper market research where you delve into the demographics and what their consumer behavior is and what drives them and what they're passionate about. I think also a lot of brands that can't afford to do market research, you could almost do your own market research through social. So, testing out, maybe laying out 10 different messaging styles or 10 different things that are maybe kind of drivers in someone's behavior or drivers in terms of like the kinds of content that they want to consume, and then targeting those to different audiences and actually seeing what performs well and what doesn't.
Okay.
I think that kind of creates a much more holistic story, because all of a sudden you could say, hey, this performed really well with this audience. Did it translate to purchase? Did it translate to another kind of action that I wanted someone to take? So getting I think the more data you could collect, the more you could kind of create a story in your mind and for your brand to create the optimal portfolio of, hey, this is the kind of content that'll go well with this audience to get them to behave in a certain way. I also, and I'm curious kind of on this, but one of the things I heard from someone once was be careful about profiling people too much on things that they can't control. And I think one of the things that you come across, and I'm sure you felt this way, is sometimes when you're targeted with someone just because you're a female in your 30s, for example, might actually annoy you rather than give you...
very true.
Rather than give you that brand affinity.
Yeah.
So I think as brands, it's also really important to remember, be targeted, but don't intrude. Like, don't tell people where they should be at because of their stage of life. So add value, but without kind of being prescriptive and telling people you should be here or you should be behaving this way.
Wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but you're so right. When you do get one of those ads, it feels so intrusive and it feels, definitely.
You kind of feel like, hey, why are you telling me I should be doing this?
Yes.
Just because I'm in my 30s or just because I'm a particular gender or live in a particular location.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super interesting, and it's that line of thinking that says it takes years to build trust and you can lose it overnight. And by being intrusive, we go to that place. So when we talk about hacks, when I think about profiling, I want to acknowledge what you said, but I look at it slightly differently. The line of thinking I live by is a product for everyone is a product for no one.
Yeah.
If you can't be specific in who you're talking to and the message that you're trying to convey, you'll never talk to the hearts and the minds of your consumer. When we go real general, we miss the mark. And so when I think about persona profiling or trying to profile a customer, when we look at hacks, there's 2 ways you want to do it. There's qualitative and quantitative. When we talk about quant, it's doing basic things, using the tools we have access to, the Facebook business manager, and actually looking at the data, understanding what the data says to me. Looking at things like the Google Ads Manager, doing basic keyword research, understanding is, what are people searching for? Is there a demand that we can supply? These are more looking at from a business standpoint. But remember, when I talked about the goal at the start, that should be a business goal. Okay. At the end of the day, awareness will never drive a business success. Conversions will. We need to have a revenue target or metric that we're working towards. So quant, there's a series of different tactics that you can use. You can use analytical tools like SEMrush. You can look at tools like BuzzSumo, which will help you actually understand a lot more. Qualitative, I like to go very granular and create that person, give her a name, give her an emotion, give her something that you can actually latch onto as a brand. The other thing that's important for brands is if they can really talk internally about who they're talking to, It helps them communicate it externally, but also when you bring on new team members or you engage a third party, whether it's a social agency, a performance agency, a talent agency, it doesn't matter. You can quite simply be like, this is our brand, this is our customer, and we need to figure out how to align that. So from a qualitative standpoint, a lot of that's got to do with trusting your gut, going through the process. But another way you can do it is traditional qualitative research. So get on the phone, look at your customer history, ask people the questions. What was it that made you take the decision or to buy? And once you understand that more and more and more, you start to shape it. At the start, you don't have qualitative research or quant. It's a lot harder to do or establish. So just at least build something simple, but a persona profile, you should never also have one, you should have multiple, okay? Talks to the earlier point about really looking to segment your customers and create different target audiences, because if we have different target audiences, we can create different messaging per audience, and the more relevant we can be. The last thing I just want to acknowledge is I love your test, learn, and sort of iterate mindset. That in marketing, growing a brand, you will not succeed unless you have the mindset of, I put a piece of content out there. In this instance, we're talking about content. And if I'm not testing that and looking at the feedback, what does the market tell me? Did it perform? Didn't it perform? And I'm not then iterating on that. So iteration doesn't always mean, they didn't like it, so I go this way. It means also, did they like it? Let's double down on it and produce more content. Right. Or if it's from an advertising standpoint, you double down on your budget. So there's a little bit of an extended answer, but just kind of wanted to talk to a few points there.
Nice.
And I agree, I think that there's this happy medium spot between going too broad and too granular, because, an example is if you go too broad and, going off of the targeting women in their 30s example, if you have a particular nutritional product that you're targeting and, maybe it's a weight loss product and you're targeting women in their 30s, awesome. You'd think, hey, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Women in their 30s maybe want to get fit. Maybe they're getting over kind of the 20s where you're naturally fit. But all of a sudden, what if you by accident get someone that is pregnant and, is kind of paranoid about putting on weight during pregnancy? And all of a sudden you're kind of by going too high level, you're missing out a pretty big piece that's going to then put off 20% of your consumers or however many. So, and then if you go too granular, then you kind of risk being creepy. So there's this middle ground that you really have to take.
Nobody wants to be creepy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Totally. And I can imagine you can also burn a lot of cash that way. If you're in both scenarios, spending too much, getting too granular, or going too broad.
So and another rule of thumb, but and it sort of goes back to, I really want to put an emphasis on it. A product for anyone, everyone is a product for no one. You just won't win that way. You have to be willing to irritate some people. There's no better choice of words that I can use. We can't win everybody, but it's better to try and win the mass rather than the minority. You're always going to have that 20% that just don't respond or engage with the message, or you put content out there and they actually respond negatively to it, but maybe via comments. But you have to look at a bigger picture. How many people from that piece of content did we actually educate, entertain, and inspire? Now, if lots of your comments are negative, that's that sort of test, learn, iterate thing where you need need to listen to the feedback. And that's what a lot of brands get really stuck with. Customer centricity is also another buzzword. But what is customer centricity? And people just throw it around now as a terminology or something. It's almost like corporate social responsibility. We're doing CSR, or we're customer centric. It's part of their values on their wall in an organization. It doesn't work like that. Brands need to get out of their own way. This is not about you. It's about the customer. Understand who they are. Understand how you're going to support them, because as well, if you want to win the hearts and minds of people and create loyal customers who are also your brand advocates, the only way you're going to do that is really talk to them and add value to this point. That's what we're all talking about here. If we were to dissect and dilute everything we say today, it'll be value. We should count how many times we say value at the end of this.
So are you seeing any platforms that perform better than others in terms of specific locations or product types or demographics than others?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier when we were chatting that we've just finished the social media census, which is kind of a big research piece on social media use. So coming soon, which is very exciting.
I will post a link below, everyone.
Yeah, which will be awesome. So I'll read out some of the data because it's really interesting. But one of the things that we found was, so things that got the highest purchase through social media was people that saw something on any social media channel and then went back later to purchase.
Right, okay.
And then particularly people are also buying direct through Facebook and Instagram ads. So we're definitely seeing really high conversion on Facebook ads and Instagram ads, as well as social content that's been posted. And the things that we're seeing sell the best is clothing and fashion, homewares and household items, beauty and makeup, books, and then computer, gaming and electronics, and health and wellness. So in terms of online purchases, I think, while all the channels are really good for getting awareness, I think that Facebook and Instagram are still the best converting for online purchase. And, people are always saying, hey, Facebook is dying, Facebook is dead. And I think we've heard that for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Every month, it's just dying a slow, painful death, maybe. But we're still seeing the sales conversions through Facebook perform the best. I think if you are selling to consumers, Facebook is still a really strong channel to be following.
Yeah, great. So from a more of a paid performance standpoint, when we actually look at the channels side by side, Google will always outperform every single channel. And I'll explain to you why. When we think about customer behavior, it's broken into where they are within their journey and their path to purchase. Google is an intent-based channel, meaning that I'm sitting down in front of my computer, I'm typing into a keyword which is specifically related to an outcome that I'm looking to achieve. High intent, meaning that with Google and Google Ads, they're always going to outperform any other channel within reason. We always recommend all of our clients and all brands, if you're going to invest anywhere, invest into Google. Now, I want to preface that by saying a couple other things. And it's so hard in these situations. We're giving broad advice, and broad advice sometimes needs to be taken as a grain of salt, because what I just said there doesn't apply for all industries. When we look at the industries you're referencing to, which are predominantly beauty, fashion, wellness, lifestyle, etc., Facebook is a great channel because there's a huge brand play that comes into consideration.
Brand affinity.
Exactly. And the thing is, with the Google ad, you can't tell your brand story like you can with Facebook and Instagram. So even though Google in most industries will outperform most other channels just because of where the customer is and the high intent. Don't always think of that. How much, where is the other thing to think about is what is my cost of my retail price on my product? Because that's also going to help you understand what channel best to focus on, because high price tickets, the ticketed items, you can't just run a Facebook ad and someone clicks and buys. We've seen with Facebook ads, sub $50, they're essentially, I've gone blank on my line of thinking here. I almost need to do my extra take. But with purchases sub $50, you're looking at somebody taking a reactive based purchase, meaning that there's no consideration into it. They see it, and we've all done it. We're on Facebook. Impulse is the word I was looking for. Thank you. You feel more team. But the whole thing there is, huge impulse purchasing happens when the price point is low enough to enable someone to take an impulse purchase. For higher price products, anything over $50 realistically, we need to nurture the customer more and actually take them through a sales funnel where we take them from that sort of awareness phase through the consideration phase and then into the conversion phase. 99% of the time, your customer will sit in what's called the consideration phase, where they're sitting there. They know who you are, but they haven't yet converted. Right. Sometimes that happens in a day. Sometimes it happens in a year. There's no rule of thumb. The only thing you can break down as a brand is what is my retail price, and the higher my price point, the longer my path to purchase will be. So the more I need to build out my sales funnel. Talking about channels, but I want to focus on another channel, which is almost like the ugly cousin that people don't talk about, because Google ads and Facebook and socials, they're the attractive.
Bit sexy and cool.
They're cool channels.
Yeah.
Is email marketing.
Yeah.
Statistically, email marketing produces a 38 to 1 ROI. So every dollar you invest, you return 38 to 1. That's an industry average. So once again, but if you compare that to other channels like Facebook, Google, and Pinterest, LinkedIn, et cetera, it dwarfs them, okay? Right. Now, why does email work so best, and why is it important to think about email as a channel to focus on? Is email is personal, it's one-to-one. It's also the only place that you own the audience. Google, Instagram could die today.
Yeah.
And let's say Instagram may die because of something like a TikTok. You don't own that audience. You can have 1 million followers.
Yeah.
Overnight, you lost them. Email is the only owned audience you have as a business. So I always encourage brands to really focus on email as part of their strategy, because it gives you an opportunity to continuously show up and create personalized messaging to them all the time. There's
Yeah.
no time constraint on it. So email's a really big channel I want to talk about.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I didn't know the conversion rates on that. That's amazing.
I think you do, because the Right Fit does a fantastic job.
We do.
Fantastic job
We
of
do
email
love
marketing.
we do love an
Awesome.
email market.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah.
And as a marketer, that's half of what I do. I always encourage people, if you want to figure out what to do, follow other brands, sign up to their mailing list, and then think as a consumer, but also as a marketer, analyze what they're doing. Every single time you walk down the street, look at what their brand's point of sale look like. If it's bricks and mortar, look what their digital strategy is. Look what they're talking about, and actually think through the process and understand what their message is. The more you can actually analyze that and think as a marketer, and also as a consumer. The consumer is the empathy part.
Yeah.
Actually feeling, I read that message, what did I feel like? And so that's what I do. And, I acknowledge the right fit there, because I don't get an email or a message without actually analyzing it as a marketer. You guys do a great job.
Thank you. And
Not a paid endorsement.
I'm so guilty of doing the same thing, signing up to so many different people's newsletters and seeing what I get, and like just loving some of the language that you see brands use, and then how they retarget you across social. And I think it's such an interesting way to do a little bit of market research and learn so many different tips and tricks.
Completely.
While we're on that, now that we know that we've got all of these awesome channels, and email is definitely one I hadn't thought of, is there content that you see that works better on specific channels than others? I know everyone says video is amazing, but is video suitable for all channels? Is there particular types of photos or GIFs or, length of content that we should be thinking about with all of these things?
I think that's a really, really good question, because I think as people that work in brand, we're always looking for, the magic formula, or the
silver
holy,
bullet,
the silver bullet of what is the perfect piece of content.
Yeah.
What I'm really seeing is just how quickly that changes because of consumer behavior. So even if we, look back at January, for example, when all of the bushfires were going on, all of a sudden, video content almost stopped performing as well, because people's attention was being diverted in so many different places.
Gosh, that's interesting.
So I actually think, rather than look for the silver bullet, it's good to look at what's going on in the market and where people's attention is going. And what I really find is when the market is really crowded, and by market, I'm kind of thinking of, a person's attention span. So when kind of lots of news or lots of events are trying to grab someone's attention, what could you do as a brand in the content space that will capture that attention, add value, but do it in a way that kind of seamlessly aligns with what people are consuming through social?
That makes sense.
Saying that, there's definitely trends happening right now. So for example, this is purely for the social space, but what we really saw is a move away. We saw a big move towards video. And then we saw a bit of a move away from video as people were consuming so much content over the last couple of months.
Wow.
And now we're kind of seeing that pick back up again. And this is purely from the brands that we work on. We kind of saw people responding better to images or GIFs or things that were maybe quicker snackable pieces of content to consume, that were quite uplifting and positive during a time when people maybe needed a little bit of cheering up or a little bit of distraction.
Yeah.
Especially now, people are spending so much more time online. And I think as brands, we assume, hey, they're spending more time online so they could consume more longer form content, but oftentimes that's actually not the case. And, their attention is so taken up with something else. So really thinking about, how much time do they have to consume content and what could we give them, I think is a really good way to approach it.
I love that. And I'd never thought about thinking about it on a more macro level, and that it's also not something that's just like set and forget, where it's like, oh, video is great, let's do video for everything.
Exactly. Well, there's another really interesting piece of, and I think you guys would have followed this as well, because, we're always looking at like trends and how to optimize things. But every year we look at what people respond best to when it comes to content. So whether that's a discount, a giveaway, an in the know, coming back to the purpose of a piece of content. And one of the things I've noticed is that as our economy changes, what people want from brands in terms of social content changes. So when we're in a really stable economy, people want behind the scenes and in the know information. They want to feel, information rich. So they want to know something that the person next to them doesn't want to know. However, when we're going through economic instability, what people want is, you know, a discount or a voucher or a promotion. And that's when things like free shipping or a special promo code become a lot more valuable to people when there's a bit of economic instability. So looking at it from a macro level in terms of where our economy is really important as well.
God, yeah, I've never considered that.
Super interesting to see kind of how the trends follow each other. Yeah.
Are you seeing anything internally as well from a performance perspective?
Can I ask, can we go back to the actual question?
Yes.
I was like, I was so into that rant. I was like,
we derailed it a little bit.
I was going to talk to you, and I was like, hold on, what was the actual question?
Well, is there any content that works on each channel better than others, and why?
I'm sorry, then I totally derailed you.
No, I love that.
That was exactly. Yeah, I was like, I'd never thought about that. It actually, because it's not just about video works on this channel and blah blah blah. It's like it doesn't really matter what the channel is. It's about.
Yeah. Okay. So there's an overarching kind of rule that there are going to be certain bits of content that will perform better, and it's also got to do with what. Let me start again.
It's getting to that time in the afternoon. We're all just losing our marbles a little.
With content, it's not about what's the best piece of content for the channel. It's got to do with what your audience wants, and I keep going back to that point. The reason why that is, if your audience likes GIFs, give them GIFs. If they like static and pretty images, give them static. If they like video, give them video. So overall, always produce content that your audience wants. Then in saying that, there is certain bits of content that you are able now to produce in today's market and environment that are going to perform better. We spoke about it, but email is definitely, email's one of them. Producing content for email, but also video. I want to talk about why video works. When we talk about the brand and telling brand stories, there's this line of thinking that says an image is worth 1,000 words. Now on video, a video is made up of thousands of frames. So you're telling this huge story in a very short and succinct way. And that's something you can't do through imagery. You can't do through any other sort of way. So video is definitely a platform that brands should really explore and really look at. How can we tell our brand story and communicate our message better? The other thing I want to build on there is when we look at it from a paid standpoint, video gives us an opportunity to optimize for viewability. So if you think about the paid channels such as Facebook and Instagram, we're able to actually optimize based on and retarget to an audience based on how much of the video they've viewed. We generally work on a 3 to 4 second viewability because if someone's watched a video to 3 to 4 seconds, they're expressing some form of intent or interest, meaning we can then move them down what we call as a funnel. And when we talk about messaging, it's all about sequential messaging. You don't just create one piece of content that solves all your problems. It's that one piece of content at the top of your funnel, which is the awareness phase, which then helps them move down. And all we're trying to do is push someone all the way down the sales funnel, okay? And understanding what that looks like is where it really starts. But to my earlier point, if they want gifts, give them gifts. If they want inspirational quotes, give them inspirational quotes. So it's got to do with what your audience wants, but then you've also got to remember what are the, business and the economic side of things. And then what's my goal? So,
You know, one interesting thing that we've recently found, and this was purely based on the research piece that we did. One of the things that we see brands do a lot of the time is focus on the visual piece of content. So whether that's the video or the GIF or the image, and the caption and the copy is actually an afterthought.
Totally.
And, you know, we've been guilty of it even as a social agency, sometimes focusing so much on the visual piece that, you know, we don't pay as much attention to the copy. In the recent survey that we did, I think it was 68% of people that responded saying that they pay as much attention to the copy as they do to the visual image, which we thought was fascinating because I think, you know, when you scroll through Instagram and when you scroll through Facebook, you obviously, the images is what catches people, but what then gets them to take that next step of a deeper engagement with your brand is actually consuming the copy where you explain a particular story to them and where you're able to connect with them on a deeper level. So I think it's really good to keep that in mind, that every piece of content has 2 sides to it. Actually 3 sides. You know, you have the copy, you have the image, and then you have the consumer engagement back and forth once you put that piece of content out there. But a lot of brands sometimes stop at just the visual piece of content. So it's so important to keep the other 2 in mind.
And that third piece that you just mentioned as well, because I think you also see brands that will post content out into the ether and then never engage with their customer again. There's no there's no communication, there's no community, there's no replying to comments or, you know, engaging again, which I think is such a missed opportunity.
Crazy. We always use sorry, you go.
No, you jump in.
I was just going to say, we always use the example of, you know, if you walk into a store and you ask the shopkeeper, hey, do you have this dress in a size small? And all they do is like turn around and face their back to you. You would lose your shit. You would kind of say like, okay, well, I am never coming back here again. Yeah, you might even like, you know, kind of leave in like a bit of a rough and tough. Yeah, but brands on social do it all the time.
Yeah.
Like all the time, the equivalent of that. So, and then I think sometimes brands say, well, why isn't social working for me? But a lot of times it's those little things that you forget in the rush of doing the big stuff.
Yes, being so focused on getting that shiny piece of video content out without thinking about the goal.
Yeah. Talking about shiny objects, and that's a big thing with video in particular. We're all talking about video, and it's that thing of we need to do video. And you can just, I see it firsthand. You would see it, we all see it, you know, brands like we need to do influencer marketing, we need to do videos. I always push back, but why? Answer that question for me. And so for video, it's like, oh, everybody's doing video. And once again, it's a buzz. And as you know, business owners, brand managers, entrepreneurs, the shiny light or object syndrome is a real thing. There's no cure for it. But the only cure is radical accountability to yourself and actually stopping and saying, well, why are we doing video? Does this fit into our content ecosystem? And if so, how are we going to do it? To your point, I love that line of thinking that, you know, we just put the piece of content out there, but we're not thinking about like what else supports that piece of content. That piece of content could be an image, a GIF, a video. Then what's the copy? What's the story we're telling through the copy, and how is it supporting the video, or more importantly, elevating it? The third layer, you spoke about it differently, was engagement. I talk more performance terms, but it's the call to action. Why are we putting this piece of content out, and what are we hoping or aiming for the user to take? What's our desired goal? And when you can understand those kind of three things, you can really start to create really great content.
Okay, so now that I know sort of that I just started thinking about goals, thinking about content in different ways, how frequently should I be refreshing content? Is there a magic formula like, you know, Facebook ads should be retired every 2 weeks, or, you know, on social I should be posting every day on particular channels? Is there sort of hard and fast rules, or?
Do you want to take it from a performance standpoint, and I'll take it from a social standpoint?
Yeah, I can talk to both, but from a performance standpoint, the simple rule of thumb is when your ad hits what's called ad fatigue, meaning that you've hit an impression fatigue point, meaning that after you display an ad to somebody sort of 6 times, if they don't engage with it, it's hit what's called ad fatigue. Turn it off or put them into another segment. That's when you sort of look at it from a performance standpoint.
Yeah. And then I guess looking at it from just purely organic social, you know, kind of the content that you put out there on your social channels, while there's no hard and fast rule, what we strongly recommend is kind of finding the happy medium, obviously, of not over inundating your audience, but also making sure that you maximize your views. So for example, you know, we see some brands posting a couple of times a day, and that doesn't actually give a big chunk of your consumers the chance to see your content. Instead, it keeps putting new content out there. So you're probably getting the same like small group of people seeing each piece of content, but your broader audience not seeing any. This is a very, very, very generic rule of thumb, which might not be right for all brands.
Yeah. Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. But we definitely suggest posting at least, you know, a couple of times a week on Facebook, a couple of times a week on Instagram. You could definitely get away with posting more on Instagram, and then doing kind of daily story series through Instagram as well. That's kind of the basics for Facebook and Instagram, which in Australia are where the core of our audience are. So, you know, almost, I think, 90% of online users are on Facebook. And I think now most Australian online active social users are also on Instagram as well. So I think that's kind of tipped over the 50% mark. So I definitely think that couple of times a week rule of thumb is great, but it also depends on how complex of a product you have. So if, for example, a brand has only one SKU of something, so, you know, one gin, one flavor, one key way to consume, then you probably don't want to be posting 4 times a week about it, because people will kind of get sick of seeing that same drink, that same brand, that same message. But if, for example, you have a gin brand that has 12 different flavors, I think you're much better off posting 5 times a week featuring different flavors, and then having really good advertising targeting on the back end towards the different consumers that are going to be consuming the different SKUs. So looking at kind of the product complexity and taking that into account with how often you post.
Yeah, and to just build on that, so I completely agree. Social rule of thumb, daily or bi-daily, so to speak. When we think about longer form content, so blog posts, going back to that sort of pyramid model that I spoke about earlier, where we want to produce long form content and then figure out how we can cut it down into sort of like bite-sized pieces and then distribute. Blogging weekly or bi-weekly. But the thing is, it's all got to do with how much does your audience want to hear from you. And if you only have one SKU, that doesn't mean you only can post once a week because you only have one thing to talk about. Find out what, and this goes back to understanding your customer, what else are they interested in? Where are they showing up? What else are they reading? What's content? It's not always about trying to promote or endorse your product. At the end of the day, your product is a side, is underneath the brand. Focus on building the brand, and a brand isn't just about selling product. So a rule of thumb I like to look at is when you create content, break it into two categories, sales focused and non-sales focused. It's as simple as that. You can look at a content calendar if it's on Instagram, and we can say there's, I like to work in 9 blocks because that's essentially what you look at. If it's email, it's over months, building a longer form content calendar. But with this, what you want to think about is give, and then ask. So those non-sales focused pieces of content should predominantly outweigh the sales focused pieces of content where you're talking about your product or offering a discount or trying to do something that's going to drive a conversion. Should be focusing predominantly on that educate, entertain, and inspire line of thinking. And if you can actually look at your content like that, it's quite simple to say, oh, we're showing up 4 times a week talking about our product, and once being like, hey, here's an inspirational quote. You need to flip that weighting. All right. Once again, not a blanket rule, but it is when you want to build a brand, talking about your product isn't where you want to start. It's almost like they work hand in hand with one another, but it should be secondary. Building the brand should be primary. The line of thinking is this: focus on building a brand, building a community, and then selling your product.
I love that. It's such an interesting concept, flipping the thinking instead of being about how can I use content to sell. Yeah.
And that's really hard as a business owner because, and we see it firsthand because we're measured on success.
Yeah.
What are the performance metrics? Did it, and at the end of the day, business owners are looking at the bottom line.
Yeah.
Did all of this activity actually drive a result? And that's a real hard thing. And we can't actually measure qualitative research.
Yeah.
You can quant, we had this amount of engagement, this amount of whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But building a brand is a long game, not a short game. And if you want to survive, build a brand. I can tell you firsthand, and we've all seen it through COVID, and I watched it happen. The brands that didn't actually invest into building a brand and that foundation, and building a brand is creating an emotional connection with your user.
Yeah.
A brand is not determined by the product you sell or your logo or your USP or your value props.
Yeah.
That isn't. A brand is the emotion that a consumer feels towards your brand. And we can't actually a lot of the time put words to those emotions. But if you don't build a brand, when things change, people will leave you. The amount of jump rate between brands is huge.
Yeah.
So how do you build loyalty? And it's all got to come back to your content strategy. And the more value you add, the deeper emotional connection you're building with somebody, the deeper emotional connection, the more loyalty. And it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
So,
And I think you actually get your brand, when you have a really strong brand, you get the brand to a point where posting about the brand becomes that entertain, inspire category, which I think is really interesting when you kind of get the brand to that level of strength and loyalty.
Yeah, where they become the thought leader and the go-to place for anything in that industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What about resharing other people's content? Is this a yay? Is this a nay? How do you feel about it from a brand perspective? From social, obviously, I think there's so many questions around that for people. Are we allowed to? Is it allowed if we credit? Is it good practice? And then from a performance marketing perspective, is it something that's going to help drive people further down that funnel?
I'll jump in on that one. It's quite simply, I spoke about building a brand and building a community. When we talk about a community, it doesn't just apply to your consumers or people that you're trying to actually have purchase your product. A community has also got to be on a B2B level. What is your network? What does that look like? And when we talk about reposting content, realistically, what you're trying to do there is form a strategic partnership. And if we dissect what a strategic partnership is, it's where you're aligning with a certain brand or business that shares a similar value set to your business and message, but is non-competing or non-conflicting. So we don't want to be, promoting the content from our competitor.
Yeah.
We want to be promoting people, if we're a lifestyle brand, what are other lifestyle categories? And then figuring out how we partner with them. and building that into your actual line of thinking. So whether it is organically on social, 100%, build your network, build a community of other like-minded brands and individuals, full stop, okay? From a paid standpoint, huge opportunity. If we look at it tactically from a link building standpoint, so just for content, link building is a common term we use in like our search engine optimization, where we're getting other websites to link a piece of content to our website, and that's creating what's called domain authority. So if you have businesses that have high domain authority, meaning Google's algorithms identified them as quote unquote a key, opinion leader, or they have weight, if they're linking to your website, not only are they helping you increase your profile, they're also driving traffic to your website through that link. And those links, when I reference that term, it's we see a word which has been hyperlinked, and that links out to a website. So when producing content, you should first and foremost be sharing other people's content as part of like an ego baiting strategy. You can look at it and be like, hey, I'm going to share your piece of content. Nice to meet you, by the way. We should chat. Let's get a coffee. It's one way to do it. It's all strategy. It's a game of chess. The other thing is, if you're looking at it from a performance standpoint, if you're putting, if someone's linking to your website who has huge search volume to their website, or huge traffic, I should say, and then they're driving a small percentage of their traffic to your website, the transfer of trust is happening there, which is essentially social proof. X website is saying, I trust this website, I've linked to them. So automatically, not only are their customers or visitors coming across to you, but they're also handing over that trust. So you should be not only repurposing, having your content repurposed on other people's website, you should be doing it in reverse. It's very much a give take. It's a law of reciprocity. It's like, I give and take, and that's what it's all built on. So I want to sort of really put an emphasis on, when we think about sharing content, think about strategic partnerships and understand what a strategic partnership is and who I need to align with to win. Answer that question, then figure out how to do it.
Love that. And what about on organic social? Because I know this is something we see all the time and get questions about all the time.
And it's I think you guys do a really good job of answering that for people in terms of the legalities, because I think it's such a gray area for people in terms of best practice. I think, you mentioned a really good point on aligning strategically with someone. And I think that if you do use someone's content and you do repurpose their content on a brand perspective, it's really important to make sure that that person whose content you're sharing aligns with the same values, the same mission, the same demographic of audience that your brand is targeting. So one of the things that we sometimes see is content being repurposed from a source that maybe has a completely different set of values and stands for something completely different from the brand that's using that piece of content. And I think this is where it's also really important for influencer marketing to make sure that you're partnered with an individual that's developing content and shares the same ethos and values with you. On an ethical standpoint, I think when you're repurposing content, it's super important just to make sure that you have the right permissions, that you credit someone, that you make sure that it's okay to repurpose their content. There's a lot of people out there that make money from the content that they create. And I don't think it's a great thing to do as a brand when you simply take that piece of content without checking with them if you could use it. And, it leads to a lot of grief and it doesn't leave a great taste in people's mouths. So I think on a tactical standpoint, always check and make sure that it's okay. I think on a more feeling standpoint and brand alignment standpoint, make sure that what the person stands for actually is the same thing as what your brand stands for as well. Saying all of that, I think it's awesome when it aligns to co-produce content if you can. So rather than rejigging someone else's content to fit into your strategy, why not reach out to them and see if you could co-produce a really great piece of content? So kind of like you're doing now, with the web series that you're doing. Yeah. I think collaboration will trump just reusing something any day. So yeah, that's kind of my view on it. I think if you could collaborate, awesome. If you can't collaborate and you want to use something, check for permission and check for values alignment.
Love that. I love that. I totally agree. And I think both of you covered it so nicely there, in that finding those strategic partners and collaborating and working together for a common goal makes so much sense. So lastly, if you had one piece of advice to give to people who want to build an effective multi-channel content strategy, where do they start? One piece of advice. Doesn't necessarily need to be where do they start, but what is the most important thing?
Yeah. I think, and I mean, okay, this comes back to how many times we say value.
Yeah.
So I think starting from what value do you add to your consumer and what kind of story can you tell to carry that message all the way through and make sure that it reads like a book. The title of your book is your brand objective, and every piece of content that you post out there should align and trickle back up to whatever your brand objective is. And that aligns perfectly with your sales funnel, because everything that you're doing, each part of the content that you're putting out there should align to some part of your sales funnel. And that's kind of that self-perpetuating circle and cycle that will make your brand really, really successful through social. So I think start at the top, figure out how the little pieces of content trickle down, and then come back up to your business objective and making sure that's aligned with your sales funnel and everything else that you're putting out there.
I love that. I'd never thought about content as a book before, and it makes so much sense. Like, you don't want these jarring chapters that make that it seem like they're from a completely different plot line with different characters. Like, it really needs to feel like a seamless experience, irrespective
and it comes down to that like trust, like the trust piece. So I think same as like, if someone meets you in the street and you're going to work and you're really polished and everything's really clean, and then they see you on the weekend and you've got like a green mohawk, they're going to be like, who are you? Like, do I even trust you?
So
and
true.
I think the brand is the same, that if you put out something that is quite jarring when everything else that you're putting out there is quite safe, it'll just make people not trust you. So making sure that you take people on the journey. It doesn't mean that you can't be a certain way. It just means you have to take people on the journey with you.
I love that. I love it. No green mohawks.
I'm going to acknowledge that as well. I love the title. I never looked at it through that lens as well. I look at it slightly differently. I think of what's called, we reference to it as message matching. So it means when someone sees a piece of content or an ad, wherever they see it, does that then match with the next stage of their journey? So generally speaking, they click that, they go through to your website. What does your website now say? And then after that, which is traditionally email, is that a consistent message? And, I love how you look at it. You're talking more of through the lens of, what is the title of my book? And then does everything speak up to it? We look at it a little bit more tactical of, from a performance standpoint, does the ad match the landing page or the destination we're driving traffic? One piece of advice, keep it simple. What's my goal? What's my objective? Then who's my customer? What are their motivations? What are their pay points? What are their needs? And thirdly, test, learn, and iterate. Quite simply look at it like that. What's my goal? What's my customer? And then be willing to go out there and test. Because if you don't test, you'll never know. And it's that whole idea of fail fast and fail forwards. And if we can have that mindset with marketing, we get so fixated on the tactics, the latest tips and tricks and optimization hacks. Marketing is a mindset, okay? A mindset of growth, and it's that whole thing. And this is why the goal thing is so important. We talk about a North Star metric. It's a key principle in growth marketing, and having that sort of defining North Star which is guiding us everywhere we go. And you need to actually look at it through that lens. And when we do, we can succeed.
I love that. So many amazing insights today. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will be talking to you both soon again, I'm sure.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us. That was awesome.
Thank you.